Okay guys, so now that you've hopefully watched the first tutorial on moving around the interface and being able to move the objects around by clicking and dragging them, if you didn't watch that, click on the link in the description and you can watch that tutorial right now. But for this tutorial, we're going to be talking about the buttons on the right hand side of the screen. So these are tabs actually. So what you see here is a number of buttons, and you can click here and drag it out actually if you want to see all of them, which I recommend you do. And you'll see if you click on them, the content down here changes. And you can see from these buttons here, we can change a number of settings. So for this button, which is the first button that looks like a little camera, it's actually rendering. So click on the render and you'll see it pops up really quickly with a cube here. The cube looks different than the one we had before. That's because this is what something looks like when it's rendered. Now it would usually look better than this because this one has no color and not very good lighting, but that's basically what we mean by rendering something. So by rendering it, it's actually making it into the animation that you'd like it to be. You can also have a moving render, which is an animation. Now for this next button here, we have the layers. So in Blender, there are things called layers, and this is on the first layer, but we can also move something to the next layer. And the way we do that is by clicking M while we have it selected, by clicking the right mouse button on it. Click M, and then press the second layer. Now down here, you can see it changed layers. So if we click on the second layer, you can see it's here. We can move it back just by clicking on the first, by clicking on it, pressing M, and then clicking on the first layer from what pops up. You can manipulate layers on here as well. So this is basically where we get the scene information. And there are different scenes in Blender. I'm not going to get into too much about that right now because it's pretty complicated, but yeah. This is the world, basically. So you can set basically what the background is, if there's mist or stars, or basically it's setting what the environment is for your animation. We're not going to get into this right now, but basically you can rotate your object that you have selected, relocate it or move it, set the scale here. I wouldn't recommend using this layer too much for just changing things like the scale or anything like that, because we can do that right in the window and it's less time consuming and easier. These are the constraints. We're going to get into that in a later tutorial. The modifiers. Now there are a number of modifiers in Blender, and what these will do will actually modify your object that you have selected. So for example, I can use something like the subdivision surface modifier, and you'll see it changed it from what it was, a cube, into, and when I move this up, these subdivisions here, it changed it into more of an oval. So we'll mess around with some of these modifiers later, but you can just click X to delete that modifier and get back to what you had, which was the rectangle. Now on here we have the data of the object and the data of the textures. And what a texture is basically any sort of image that you have on the object. So maybe you have an image that you want to make, maybe you have a furniture that you want to have some sort of blanket image on. So you can add an image onto objects, and I'll show you how to do that later. Material, Basically, you can make an object any color you like, and that also kind of ties in with the textures. The textures, this is how you actually add a texture. This button right here was just how you see the textures you have. But this button here, the one with the grid, is actually how you add textures. And later we'll be showing you how to get textures. This is just showing you what the buttons are. So here is our physics. No, here is our it's a particles tab. So we can make something have particles. And just by doing that, just by pressing that plus button, you can kind of see what I mean here. So we can set up what's called particle systems. And particle systems, for example, you can make balls bounce around on the ground, or you can make snow that when it hits the ground, it'll stop, because you can use Newtonian physics or other physics systems, like fluid physics or anything like that. Now we have the physics. Basically what the physics are, kind of like the particle systems, but you can add things like rigid bodies, which are, you can make this whole rectangle, when it falls, you can make it bounce, or you can make it just stop. You can make smoke, fluid, so water simulations, soft body simulations, so like Jello almost, dynamic paint, so you can paint things, cloth, so you can make like a polyester or wool or something like that, cotton that just falls and behaves like a cloth, so cloth simulation, collision, so that's making a collision object. I'll show you what I mean by that later on, and force field, pretty self-explanatory. So these are the buttons that you'll need. Just keep that in mind. You don't need to memorize the buttons necessarily, because when you hover over them, you're going to get the name of the button, and that'll tell you pretty much what you need to know. Yeah, so that's basically what's going on in this tutorial. We'll be showing you some new things in the next tutorial. Bye.